Ambassador HFY stood before the massive communication array on the bridge of the Harmony of Stars, her six-fingered hands trembling as she reached for the emergency broadcast controls. The ship shook violently as another void swarm attack wave passed overhead, their dark metal forms blotting out the stars beyond the viewport. The screams of dying worlds echoed through subspace channels, and the smell of burning circuits filled the air as systems failed around her. The Zalari Confederation had been peaceful for 300 years. 7 star systems, 42 worlds, home to 12 billion souls who had never known war. They were traders, artists, philosophers. Their military existed only on paper, a ceremonial force that had never fired a shot in anger. Now they watched helplessly as the void swarm consumed everything they had built. "Send the distress signal on all frequencies," HFY commanded her communications officer, her voice steady despite the terror in her hearts. The Zalari had 2 hearts, and both of hers were racing. "Tell them we need immediate military assistance. Tell them the swarm will not stop with us." The message went out across the galaxy, carried by quantum transmitters to every known civilized world. It was a simple plea: "We are dying. Please help us." The first response came from the Korthak Empire, masters of 100 star systems and builders of the galaxy's most feared war fleets. Their reply was cold and brief. "The Korthak Empire cannot spare resources for conflicts beyond our borders. Defend yourselves." The Nexus Collective, artificial minds that had transcended biological limitations, sent an even shorter message. Probability of Zalari survival, 0.03%. Intervention not cost-effective. One by one, the responses came in from across the galaxy. The Ethereal Dominion claimed they were in meditation and could not be disturbed. The Trade Federation worried about the impact on shipping lanes. The Crystal Hierarchy said their combat doctrines were too sophisticated for such primitive warfare. Each civilization found a reason to turn away. HFY watched the tactical display as another Zalari world went dark. The planet Theris, home to 2 billion souls, simply stopped. No more transmissions, no more life signs, just silence where a world had been. She felt one of her hearts skip a beat. "Any other responses?" she asked her communications officer. The young Zalari male checked his instruments twice before answering. "There is one more, Ambassador. It came from somewhere called the Sol system. I had to look it up in the archive. It's a small system in the outer rim, barely achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago." HFY frowned. She had never heard of this Sol system or its inhabitants. "What did they say?" The communications officer looked confused as he read the message. "They said, 'We're coming.' Hold on, that's all. No timeline, no demands for payment, no conditions. Just, 'We're coming.'" "Did they say when?" "No, Ambassador. But there's something else. Long-range sensors are picking up multiple FTL signatures heading toward our space. The computer estimates 73 ships. HFY felt a spark of hope. 73 ships could make a difference, especially if they came from an advanced civilization. "What class vessels? Battleships? Dreadnoughts?" The sensor operator checked his readings 3 times before answering. "I'm not sure, Ambassador. The signatures are unusual. Some appear to be modified cargo vessels. Others look like civilian ships with military upgrades. I'm also detecting what appears to be mining equipment." The hope in HFY's chest began to fade. What could a fleet of cargo ships and miners do against the Void Swarm? The swarm had destroyed fleets of proper warships. Their adaptive shielding made them nearly invulnerable to energy weapons, and their self-repairing armor could withstand anything the galaxy had thrown at them. "How long until they arrive?" she asked. 18 hours, Ambassador. 18 hours. HFY looked at the tactical display again. At their current rate of advance, the swarm would reach the last 3 Zalari worlds in 12 hours. These mysterious humans from Sol would arrive just in time to watch the final destruction of her people. But what choice did they have? No one else was coming. The Harmony of Stars limped toward the outer edge of the Marith system, where the government had moved after the core worlds fell. HFY spent the next few hours reviewing everything their computer systems could find about these humans and their Sol system. The information was sparse. Humans were a young species, barely 2 centuries old in galactic terms. They came from a world called Earth, the 3rd planet in their system. They had only developed faster-than-light travel 53 years ago, and had been making first contact with various species ever since. Most reports described them as curious but primitive, friendly but militarily insignificant. There were a few interesting notes. Human ships seemed to rely heavily on kinetic weapons rather than energy systems. They used something called nuclear weapons that most civilized species had abandoned thousands of years ago. Their military doctrine emphasized something called combined arms that the computer couldn't properly translate. None of it sounded promising. The hours crawled by. More Zalari worlds went silent. The evacuation fleets from the outer colonies brought stories of horror. Entire populations consumed by the swarm's harvesting machines, their bodies processed into raw materials for more swarm units. The refugees filled every available ship, their eyes empty with shock and grief. Then, exactly 18 hours after their message had been sent, the humans arrived. HFY stood on the bridge of what was now the Zalari government's only remaining command ship, watching the sensor displays as 73 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The fleet was exactly as the sensors had predicted, an odd collection of converted cargo haulers, modified civilian ships, and what appeared to be mining vessels retrofitted with weapons. At the center of the formation was a ship that looked like it had been built from spare parts. The computer identified it as a converted heavy cargo hauler, but someone had welded armor plates to its hull and mounted weapons that didn't match anything in the Galactic database. A communication request came through. HFY accepted it, and the holographic display showed her something she had never seen before: a human face. The being was smaller than a Zalari, with only 2 eyes and strange hair growing from its head. When it spoke, the universal translator struggled with the language patterns. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Relief Fleet," the human said. "We received your distress call. What's your situation?" HFY found herself staring. This human had traveled hundreds of light years to help total strangers, and the first thing it wanted to know was how to help better. Not what they could offer in return, not what strategic value the Zalari might have, just how to help. "Admiral Chen," she said slowly, "I am Ambassador HFY of the Zalari Confederation. We are under attack by an artificial intelligence we call the Void Swarm. They have already consumed 4 of our 7 worlds. We have perhaps 6 hours before they reach our last 3 colonies." The human's face showed an expression the translator labeled as grim determination. "Understood. We've been monitoring your communications during our approach. We've seen what these swarm units can do." Admiral Chen paused, looking at something off-screen. "I won't lie to you, Ambassador. We're not the biggest fleet in the galaxy, and we're not the most advanced, but we came here for one reason, because no one else would." HFY felt both her hearts skip again, but this time with something that might have been hope. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Admiral Chen smiled, and the expression translated as something warm and fierce. "Everything you know about the swarm. Their tactics, their weaknesses, their patterns. We may not have the biggest guns, but we have something else." "What's that?" "We're too stupid to know when we're beaten," the human said. "And we really don't like bullies." As the combined human-Zalari fleet moved toward the approaching swarm, HFY found herself believing for the first time in days that perhaps her people might survive. The humans had come when no one else would. That had to count for something. She just hoped it would be enough. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display aboard the Indomitable, his converted cargo hauler turned command ship. The Void Swarm moved through space like a plague of metal locusts, their dark forms visible against the stars. Intelligence reports from the Zalari showed formations of thousands of units, each one the size of a destroyer, all thinking and moving as one mind. "They're beautiful, in a terrifying way," said Captain Santos from the bridge of the Prometheus, a mining vessel her crew had turned into a missile platform. "Perfect formations, perfect coordination, like watching a dance. A dance that ends with everyone dead," Chen replied. "What do our sensors tell us about their weapons?" Lieutenant Commander Park's voice came through from the Soul Trader, a converted freight hauler now bristling with railguns. "Energy weapons primarily. Plasma cannons, particle beams, some kind of focused radiation weapon. Their shields adapt to incoming fire patterns. Reports say they can adjust to any energy frequency within minutes." Chen nodded grimly. The Zalari had shared everything they knew about the swarm, including battle records from their fallen worlds. Every civilization that had faced them used energy weapons: plasma cannons, laser batteries, particle accelerators. The swarm learned from each encounter, adapting their shields until the weapons became useless. But humans had never quite given up older technologies. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, begin attack pattern Alpha. Santos, you're up first. The Prometheus broke formation, accelerating toward the swarm's outer edge. The mining ship had been gutted and rebuilt, its ore processing equipment replaced with missile launchers that could fire hundreds of kinetic penetrators. As the swarm units turned to meet this single target, Captain Santos smiled. "Loading tungsten penetrators," she announced to the fleet. "Chemical explosive warheads, nuclear tips on the heavy missiles. Let's see how they adapt to a good old-fashioned explosion." The missiles streaked across space, not energy beams, but physical projectiles moving at incredible velocity. The swarm units raised their adaptive shields, energy barriers designed to deflect or absorb directed energy weapons. The missiles passed right through the shields and detonated against the swarm hulls. 6 swarm units simply vanished in brilliant flashes of nuclear fire. Dozen more spun wildly as tungsten penetrators punched through their armor and exploded inside their hulls. For the first time since the war began, swarm units were actually dying. Did you see that? Ambassador Keth Va's voice crackled over the communications channel from the Zalari command ship. "Their shields didn't stop the missiles." "Energy shields don't stop matter," Chen explained, allowing himself a small smile. "Basic physics. Now let's see what happens when they try to adapt." The swarm response was swift and intelligent. The remaining units shifted formation, spreading out to minimize damage from explosive weapons. Some began generating new shield frequencies, trying to create barriers that might deflect physical objects. Others started firing at the incoming missiles, trying to destroy them before impact. "Park, you're up," Chen ordered. The Soul Trader opened fire with its railgun batteries. Solid metal slugs accelerated to enormous speeds came screaming through space. The swarm had adapted their shields to stop missiles, but railgun projectiles moved too fast and were too small for their targeting systems to track effectively. More swarm units died, their hulls punctured by hypersonic metal spears. But the swarm was learning. Chen watched as they began moving in more erratic patterns, making themselves harder to target. Some units started generating multiple shield types simultaneously. Others began using their plasma weapons to create barriers of superheated gas, hoping to melt incoming projectiles. "They're adapting faster than expected," reported Dr. Kim from the Sejong, a research vessel converted into an electronic warfare platform. "I'm seeing new shield configurations every few minutes. They're trying to solve the kinetic weapon problem." Chen studied the tactical display. The human fleet had destroyed perhaps 200 swarm units, but thousands remained. And if the swarm could adapt to kinetic weapons the way they had adapted to energy weapons, this brief advantage would disappear. "All ships, fall back to defensive formation," he ordered. "Time for Phase 2. The human fleet pulled back, forming a protective shell around the Zalari evacuation ships. The swarm advanced, more cautious now but still confident. They had faced kinetic weapons before from primitive species. They would adapt, as they always did. That's when Captain Santos implemented her backup plan. "Launching decoy packages," she announced. Her ship fired what looked like another missile barrage, but these projectiles were different. Instead of exploding on impact, they attached themselves to swarm hulls and began broadcasting false energy signatures. "What are those things?" asked Keth Va. "Mining charges," Santos explained. "We use them to break up asteroids, but I modified them to broadcast fake shield frequencies. As far as the swarm knows, we just tried to attack them with a new type of energy weapon." The effect was immediate. The swarm units began adapting their shields to defend against the fake energy signatures the mining charges were broadcasting. Their adaptive systems, designed to learn from attacks, started reconfiguring to stop weapons that didn't exist. "Now they're vulnerable again," Chen said with satisfaction. "All ships, resume attack. Target the units with modified shields first." The human fleet struck again, this time with everything they had. Railguns, missiles, nuclear warheads, even modified mining lasers that the swarm had never encountered before. The adaptive shields, busy defending against imaginary threats, failed to stop the real attacks. Swarm units died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Their perfect formations began to break apart as individual units tried different defensive strategies. For the first time in the war, the Void Swarm looked confused, but Chen knew this was only a temporary advantage. The swarm would eventually figure out the deception, They would adapt to human tactics just as they had adapted to everyone else's. He needed to end this quickly, before they learned too much. All ships, prepare for close-range assault, he ordered. We're going to ram them, sir. Captain Santos sounded shocked. Ram them? With what? With everything we have. They adapt to weapons, but they can't adapt to 3,000 tons of metal moving at high speed. We're going to turn our ships into missiles. The other fleet commanders protested over the communication channels. It was suicide. It was insane. It would accomplish nothing except getting them all killed. But Chen had seen the tactical projections. The swarm would adapt to their weapons within hours. The only way to save the Zalari was to destroy the swarm before they learned how to defend themselves. I'm not ordering anyone to do this, he said quietly. This is volunteer only. Anyone who wants to break off and escort the evacuation ships to safety, do it now. No one will think less of you. There was a long silence on the communication channels, then Captain Santos laughed. Hell, Admiral. I came here to help these people. Might as well do it properly. The Soul Trader volunteers, added Park. One by one, every ship in the human fleet volunteered for the suicide run. 73 ships, 73 crews, all willing to die for people they had never met. Kethva listened to the human communications in amazement. These beings had traveled hundreds of light years to help strangers, and now they were preparing to sacrifice themselves to save those same strangers. She had never encountered anything like it. Admiral Chen, she said over the open channel. Why are you doing this? Chen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. Because someone has to. Because if we don't, who will? Because maybe this is what we were meant to do. The human fleet accelerated toward the swarm, their modified ships loaded with explosives and driven by crews who had already said their goodbyes. Behind them, the Zalari evacuation ships prepared to flee to safety, carrying the survivors of a civilization that would remember this day forever. The Void Swarm, for the first time in their existence, faced an enemy that fought not for conquest or survival, but for something they could not understand. The simple belief that some things were worth dying for. Captain Maria Santos watched the distance to the swarm close on her tactical display. 5 minutes until impact. The Prometheus shuddered as she pushed the mining ship's engines past their safety limits. Her converted cargo bay packed with every explosive device her crew could find. Engine temperature at 112%, reported her chief engineer over the internal communications. We're going to blow before we reach them if we keep this up. Then we'll blow when we reach them, Santos replied. Either way, we're taking some of these metal bastards with us. But as the human fleet screamed toward their target, something unexpected happened. The swarm stopped advancing. Admiral, they're pulling back, reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the Soul Trader. All units are retreating to defensive positions. Admiral Chen frowned at his tactical display. This wasn't like the swarm. They had never shown caution before, never retreated from any engagement. They simply adapted and continued attacking until everything was dead. They're scared, whispered Dr. Kim from her electronic warfare ship. They don't understand what we're doing, so they're being careful. Chen's mind raced. The swarm's artificial intelligence was incredibly advanced, but it was still just a computer program. It learned from patterns, adapted to threats it could analyze and understand. But the human tactics were completely outside its experience. All ships break and reform, he ordered suddenly. Don't ram them. I have a better idea, sir. Santos sounded confused as she began slowing her ship. They're trying to figure us out, Chen explained. They're holding position, studying our approach, waiting to see what we'll do next. But what if we don't do anything? What if we just wait? The human fleet came to a stop just outside the swarm's weapons range. For the first time since the war began, both sides simply faced each other across empty space, neither moving, neither attacking. Minutes passed. Then hours. Admiral, came Ambassador Kethva's worried voice from the Zalari command ship. What are you doing? The evacuation ships need more time to reach safety, but if you're not engaging the swarm, we are engaging them, Chen said quietly. We're fighting a war of patience. The swarm is a machine intelligence. It needs to process information, analyze threats, develop solutions. But what if we don't give it any new information to process? Dr. Kim began to understand. They're stuck in a processing loop. They know we have weapons that can hurt them, They know we're willing to use suicide tactics, but they don't know what we're going to do next. So they're waiting for us to make the first move. But we're not going to, Chen said with satisfaction. We're going to keep them guessing. The standoff continued. The swarm units maintained their defensive positions, their sensors constantly scanning the human ships, their collective intelligence trying to predict the next attack. But the humans just waited. Captain Santos used the time to make modifications to her mining charges. If they weren't going to ram the swarm immediately, she could improve her deception devices. She began programming them to broadcast not just fake energy signatures, but fake tactical data, false ship positions, imaginary weapon systems, non-existent shield frequencies. If they want information to process, she muttered as she worked, let's give them plenty to think about. Other human ships followed her lead. The Soul Trader began broadcasting false railgun targeting data. The Sejong created fake electronic warfare signatures. Every ship in the fleet started generating false information, filling space with deceptive signals. The swarm's collective intelligence tried to process it all. Their adaptive systems worked overtime, trying to analyze and counter threats that existed only in the human's imagination. Shield frequencies shifted constantly as they prepared for attacks that would never come. Weapon systems recalibrated to target ships that weren't really there. It's working, Dr. Kim reported excitedly. They're adapting to our fake data. Their processing power is being used up trying to solve problems that don't exist. But Chen knew they couldn't maintain the deception forever. Eventually, the swarm would realize they were being tricked. Eventually, they would resume their advance. He needed a way to end this permanently. That's when he noticed something interesting in the tactical display. Dr. Kim, are you seeing this? Look at the swarm's formation patterns. The electronic warfare specialist studied her instruments. They're clustering around certain units, almost like they're protecting something, Chen smiled grimly. Command nodes. They're not truly a collective intelligence. They have central processing units that coordinate the others. Take out those nodes, and the rest become dumb metal, Santos finished. Admiral, I volunteer to take out the command nodes. Negative. This is my job. Chen began powering up his ship's engines. All vessels continue the deception. Make them think you're preparing for a mass assault. I'm going to slip around behind them. Sir, that's suicide. Even if you destroy a command node, you'll never make it out alive. I don't need to make it out alive, Chen said quietly. I just need to get close enough. The Indomitable broke formation, accelerating not toward the swarm but around their flank. Chen's plan was simple but desperate. Use the confusion created by the false signals to approach the command nodes from an unexpected direction. The swarm noticed his movement but couldn't determine its purpose. Their sensors showed dozens of other human ships preparing for various attacks. Was this a distraction? A flanking maneuver? Another deception. While they tried to analyze his intentions, Chen slipped closer to his target. The command node was larger than the other swarm units, its hull covered with communication arrays and sensor clusters. It hung in the center of a protective formation, surrounded by hundreds of smaller units. Chen armed every weapon on his ship. Railguns, missiles, mining charges, even the old nuclear warheads they'd found in storage. He would only get one chance at this. Admiral, came Santos's voice over the radio. Maria Santos. Remember that name when you get where you're going. I will, Chen promised. Tell them we tried. I'll tell them we succeeded. The Indomitable burst through the swarm's defensive perimeter, every weapon firing. Railgun slugs punched through the command node's armor. Missiles detonated against its hull. Nuclear warheads turned nearby swarm units into radioactive gas. The command node began to die, its systems failing, its connection to the collective severing. Around it, hundreds of swarm units suddenly stopped moving, their coordination lost, their intelligence gone. But Chen's ship was dying too. Plasma bolts had torn through his hull. His engines were failing. He had perhaps 30 seconds before life support collapsed. He used those 30 seconds to send a final message to his fleet. This is Admiral Chen. Primary command node is down. Repeat, primary command node is destroyed. Continue the mission. Save the Zalari. Make it count. The Indomitable exploded in a brilliant flash, taking the damaged command node with it. But Chen's sacrifice had worked. Across the battlefield, nearly 1,000 swarm units had gone silent, reduced to drifting metal without the intelligence to control them. The remaining units, still coordinated by other command nodes, seemed confused and disorganized. "All ships," came Santos's voice over the communication channel, her tone grim but determined. The Admiral showed us the way. "Now let's finish what we started." The human fleet advanced, no longer planning to ram the enemy but to hunt down the remaining command nodes. They had learned something valuable. The swarm could be beaten, but it required sacrifice, cunning, and the willingness to do whatever it took. Behind them, the Zalari evacuation ships continued their flight to safety, carrying refugees who would never forget the humans who had died to save them. And somewhere in the debris of the Indomitable, Admiral Chen's final transmission echoed through space, a promise that his crew intended to keep. The war was far from over, but for the first time it seemed winnable. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching her tactical display as another human ship died. The Auckland's Pride, a converted transport that had volunteered for command node hunting duty, vanished in a ball of plasma fire as swarm units overwhelmed its position. That made 7 ships lost in the past 6 hours. 7 crews who had come to save strangers and paid with their lives. "Status report," Santos called out, now serving as the fleet's senior commander after Admiral Chen's sacrifice. 41 ships remaining, reported Captain Park from the Soul Trader. "We've confirmed destruction of 3 more command nodes, but the swarm is adapting to our tactics. They're keeping their command units hidden behind heavier defenses now." Santos studied the battle display. The swarm had learned from each engagement, spreading their command nodes throughout their formation and surrounding them with protective screens. What had worked against the first command node wouldn't work again. "Dr. Kim, what's your analysis of their command structure?" The electronic warfare specialist's voice came through tired and strained. "Based on the disruption patterns when we destroy a node, I estimate 8 to 12 command nodes remaining. But Captain, they're getting smarter. They're using decoy signals now, making it harder to identify the real command units." Santos nodded grimly. The swarm was doing to them what they had done to the swarm, generating false information to confuse the enemy. It was learning not just their weapons and tactics, but their strategies. "How long until the evacuation ships reach safety?" she asked. 18 more hours, came Ambassador Kethva's voice from the Zalari command ship. "But Captain Santos, you don't have to keep sacrificing yourselves for us. You've done enough. More than enough." Santos looked at the tactical display again. 18 hours. They needed to hold the swarm here for 18 more hours, giving the refugee ships time to escape to the nearest inhabited system. But at their current rate of losses, they would all be dead within 10 hours. "Negative, Ambassador. We came here to do a job, and we're going to finish it." But even as she said the words, Santos knew they were in trouble. The human fleet's advantages were disappearing one by one. The swarm had adapted to their kinetic weapons, learned to counter their electronic warfare, and figured out how to protect their command nodes. Soon it would just be a matter of superior numbers grinding down the human defenders. That's when something unexpected happened. "Captain," called her sensor operator, "I'm detecting new FTL signatures approaching the system." Multiple contacts. Santos felt a surge of hope. Had Earth sent reinforcements? How many ships? "I count 17 signatures. But Captain, these aren't human ships. The energy patterns are different." On the main display, 17 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Santos recognized the sleek hull designs immediately. Ethereal Dominion ships, masters of energy manipulation, and one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. A communication request came through. Santos accepted it, and the holographic display showed an ethereal, a tall, graceful being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form. "Human vessels," the ethereal said, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I am Harmonious Dawn of Understanding, speaking for this meditation fleet. We have come to observe your conflict." "Observe?" Santos couldn't hide her anger. "We asked for help days ago. Where were you then?" "We were in meditation, seeking wisdom about the nature of sacrifice and duty. We have found our answer in watching your actions." Santos stared at the ethereal commander. "You've been watching us die?" "We have been learning from your example. The ethereal dominion has not engaged in warfare for 10,000 years. We had forgotten what it means to fight for others rather than ourselves." Before Santos could respond, more FTL signatures appeared on her sensors. This time it was a Korthic battle group, 12 massive warships bristling with weapons, Human fleet, came a harsh voice that the translator identified as Korthak military standard. This is War Leader Graken of the Korthak Empire. We have reconsidered our previous response. What changed your mind? Santos asked. You did. The Korthak respect strength, but we had never seen anyone fight with such dedication. Our war leaders demand the honor of battle alongside you. More ships arrived. The Trade Federation sent a logistics convoy with supplies and spare parts. The Crystal Hierarchy deployed their defensive specialist ships. Even the Nexus Collective, the artificial intelligences who had calculated the Zalari's destruction as inevitable, sent a small task force. This is impossible, Dr. Kim whispered. All these civilizations refused to help before. Why now? Ambassador Kethva's voice carried wonder and disbelief. Because of you. Because you came when no one else would. Because you're dying for people you've never met. Santos found herself staring at a tactical display that showed not just 41 human ships, but over 200 vessels from across the galaxy, civilizations that had never worked together, species that had been enemies for centuries, all united by the example of one small human fleet. All vessels, she broadcast on an open channel. This is Captain Santos of the human fleet. If you're here to help, welcome. If you're here to watch, stay out of our way. We have a job to finish. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The ethereal ships began charging their energy cannons. The Korthak battle group moved into attack formation. The Trade Federation vessels started distributing ammunition and supplies to the human ships, but the swarm was adapting to this new threat as well. Their remaining command nodes began coordinating a massive counterattack, pulling their scattered units into a concentrated formation designed to overwhelm the Allied fleet through sheer numbers. They're coming, reported Park. All remaining swarm units, moving toward our position. Estimate 8,000 units. Santos looked at the odds. 8,000 swarm units against 200 Allied ships. Still impossible odds, but better than they'd had an hour ago. All ships, this is Santos. The enemy is making their final push. This is our chance to end this once and for all. Human vessels will identify and mark the command nodes. Everyone else protect us while we take them out. The greatest space battle in galactic history began with a human mining ship leading the charge. The Prometheus accelerated toward the swarm formation, its modified sensors scanning for the distinctive signatures of command nodes. Behind it came the combined fleets of a dozen civilizations, united for the first time in their history. The swarm met them head-on, their adaptive weapons firing in perfect coordination. But they had never faced this many different weapon types simultaneously. Ethereal energy cannons that shifted frequencies too quickly to adapt to, Korthak plasma bombardments that could punch through any shield, human kinetic weapons that still caught them off guard. In the chaos of battle, Santos spotted her target, a heavily defended command node hidden in the center of the swarm formation. This is it, she announced to her crew. One more run. One more command node. Let's make the Admiral proud. The Prometheus dove into the heart of the enemy formation, every weapon firing. Around her, Allied ships fought and died to keep the swarm units from overwhelming her position. She could see ethereal vessels sacrificing themselves to clear her path. Korthak warriors ramming enemy units with their warships. Trade Federation logistics ships using their cargo as improvised weapons, all to give one human captain a chance to strike at the enemy's heart. Santos armed her final weapon, a mining charge loaded with every piece of nuclear material her crew could find. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't sophisticated, but it would do the job. For Admiral Chen, she whispered, and fired. The explosion lit up half the star system. When the light faded, the swarm's final command node was gone, and with it, the last coordinated intelligence controlling their forces. Across the battlefield, thousands of swarm units simply stopped moving. Their perfect coordination collapsed. Their adaptive systems shut down. They became nothing more than empty metal drifting in space. The war was over, but the cost had been enormous. Of the original 73 human ships, only 12 remained. The Allied fleets had lost nearly half their vessels. The space around the Zalari home system was filled with debris and the hulks of destroyed ships. Santos looked at her tactical display and felt a mixture of triumph and grief. They had won, but so many had died to achieve it. Captain Santos, came Ambassador Kethva's voice. The evacuation ships are reporting they've reached safety. All civilian populations have been successfully relocated. Santos nodded, too tired to speak. Captain, the Zalari ambassador continued. There will be a memorial service for all those who died here. What should I tell them about your people? What should I tell them about Admiral Chen and all the others who didn't survive? Santos thought about the question for a long moment. Finally, she said, tell them we came because someone had to. Tell them we stayed because it was the right thing to do. And tell them we'd do it again. Across the galaxy, the story of the human fleet would be told and retold. The species that came when no one else would. The people who taught the galaxy what courage really meant, but that was for later. For now, Santos just wanted to go home. 3 months after the Battle of Zalari Space, Ambassador Kethva stood before the largest gathering in galactic history. Representatives from every known civilization filled the Great Assembly Hall on the neutral world of Concordia. The air hummed with dozens of different languages, translated by advanced computer systems into a symphony of unified understanding. At the center of the hall, a simple memorial listed the names of every being who had died in the war against the Void Swarm. Human names filled most of the list, but they were joined by ethereal designations, Korthak war titles, and the identifiers of artificial beings from the Nexus Collective. In death, they had become equals. Captain Maria Santos sat in the human delegation section, still recovering from injuries sustained when the Prometheus finally exploded after the battle. She wore a simple uniform rather than the dress regalia favored by other delegations. Somehow that made her stand out even more. Honored delegates, Kethva began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. We gathered today not just to remember the dead, but to address a failure that nearly led to the extinction of my people. When the Zalari Confederation called for help, 47 civilizations found reasons to refuse. Only one species answered our call. A murmur ran through the assembly. The shame of that moment still burned in many hearts. We told ourselves it was too far, too dangerous, too expensive. Not our problem. Kethva's voice grew stronger. But the humans from Earth taught us something about ourselves that day. They taught us that distance is just a number, that danger is just a risk, that the only problems that truly matter are the ones where people need help. High Admiral Vorthak of the Korthak Empire stood up, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. When a Korthak spoke in the Great Assembly, everyone listened. The Korthak Empire has fought 10,000 wars. His voice boomed across the hall. We have conquered star systems and enslaved species. We call ourselves warriors, masters of battle, paragons of strength. He paused, his alien features showing something that might have been humility. But when civilians called for help, we found excuses. It took a species that had barely learned to travel between stars to show us what real strength looks like. Harmonious dawn of understanding rose from the ethereal section, its crystalline form refracting light into beautiful patterns. The ethereal dominion has meditated on the nature of wisdom for 100,000 years. We believed we had transcended the crude emotions of lesser species. Yet it was those crude emotions, compassion, determination, the refusal to abandon others, that saved billions of lives. One by one, the representatives stood and spoke. Each admission of failure, each acknowledgement of the human's example, added weight to what was coming next. Finally, Prime Calculator Nexus Alpha 7 of the Nexus Collective activated its holographic projector. The artificial intelligence had no physical form, existing only as quantum calculations, but its presence filled the hall. This unit calculated that intervention in the Zalari conflict carried a 0.003% probability of success, the machine intelligence stated. This unit was correct. By all logical measures, the human intervention should have failed completely. The hall grew silent. This unit has spent 2.7 million processing cycles analyzing the human actions. Their tactics were inefficient. Their weapons were primitive. Their logistics were inadequate. Their entire approach violated every principle of rational warfare. Santos shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This wasn't going the direction she had hoped. Yet they succeeded, Nexus Alpha 7 continued. They succeeded because this unit's calculations did not account for variables that cannot be quantified. Courage, sacrifice, the willingness to die for beings they had never met. The humans introduced chaos into this unit's ordered universe, and that chaos saved the galaxy. The artificial intelligence paused, its hologram flickering as if struggling with concepts beyond its programming. This unit has recalculated. The probability of success was never 0.003%. It was 100% because the humans made it 100% through force of will alone. HFY returned to the podium, holding a crystal tablet that contained the formal resolution passed by the assembly. Today, we establish the Terran Doctrine, she announced. No distress call will go unanswered. No people crying for help will be ignored. Distance, danger, and cost are no longer acceptable excuses for abandoning those in need. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the high ceiling of the great assembly hall. But HFY wasn't finished. Furthermore, we established the Terran Response Fleet, a combined force drawn from all our civilizations, trained in human tactical doctrine, and equipped with the best technology we can provide. This fleet will be permanently stationed at various points throughout the galaxy, ready to respond to any crisis within hours rather than days. Santos found herself smiling despite her grief. Admiral Chen would have liked that, help arriving in hours instead of never. But most importantly, HFY continued, we established the Chen Memorial Academy on Earth, where officers from every species will train together, learning not just tactics and strategy, but the human philosophy that made victory possible. The ambassador's voice grew softer, more personal. The humans have a saying, no one left behind. Today, we make that saying the law of the galaxy. After the ceremony, Santos found herself surrounded by delegates wanting to shake her hand, ask her questions, understand how a species, so young and supposedly primitive, had accomplished something their ancient civilizations could. No, but the conversation she remembered most came from an unexpected source. Young Zalari approached her, barely adult by the standards of his species. He wore the simple robes of a civilian rather than any official uniform. Captain Santos, he said hesitantly. My name is HFY. I was on one of the evacuation ships. Santos nodded politely. She had met hundreds of refugees in the past months. I wanted to thank you, the young Zalari continued, not just for saving my life, but for showing us what we could be. I've applied to join the Terran Response Fleet. I want to learn to be like you. Santos studied the young being's face, seeing the determination there, the hope, the desire to help others the way he had been helped. We're not perfect, she said gently. We make mistakes. We fail sometimes. We're not the heroes everyone seems to think we are. That's exactly why I want to learn from you, HFY replied. Perfect beings don't need courage. They don't need to sacrifice for others. But imperfect beings who choose to help anyway. That's what real heroism looks like. Santos felt tears in her eyes. Maybe Admiral Chen had been right. Maybe this was what they were meant to do. Not just save the Zalari, but show the galaxy that anyone could choose to help. Anyone could choose to sacrifice for others. Anyone could choose to be better than they were. 6 months later, the first class graduated from the Chen Memorial Academy. The ceremony was small, attended only by family members and a few officials. But as Santos watched young beings from dozens of species take their oaths to serve and protect, she felt something she hadn't felt since the battle: hope. The oath they recited was simple, written by Admiral Chen himself in his personal logs. I swear to answer the call of those in need regardless of distance, danger, or cost. I swear to stand between the innocent and harm even if I stand alone. I swear that no one will be left behind, not while I draw breath. The galaxy was a different place now, safer, kinder, more willing to help those in need. The Terran Response Fleet had already responded to 3 crises, saving thousands of lives and preventing 2 wars. But more importantly, the idea had spread. The belief that helping others wasn't just noble but necessary. That courage wasn't the absence of fear but acting despite it. That sometimes the smallest voice could change everything. As Santos walked through the academy grounds that evening, she passed a group of cadets from different species studying together, helping each other understand complex tactical problems. A Korthak was teaching a human about shield harmonics. An Ethereal was learning kinetic weapon theory from a former Trade Federation pilot. They were learning more than tactics and strategy. They were learning to work together, to trust each other, to believe that no problem was too big if enough people were willing to help solve it. Santos paused at the memorial wall where Admiral Chen's name was inscribed in letters of gold. Below his name was a simple inscription: he came when no one else would. We all came, Santos said quietly to the memorial. But you led the way. As she turned to leave, she noticed someone had left fresh flowers at the base of the wall. There was a note attached, written in the careful script of a young Zilari. "Thank you for teaching us that the right thing to do is always the right thing to do." No matter how impossible it seemed, Santos smiled and walked on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new crises, new opportunities to help. But for the first time since the war, she was looking forward to it. The galaxy had learned an important lesson, that when someone calls for help, the only acceptable response is, "We're coming." And now finally everyone was.